Welcome to today's video about the violent, chaotic, and utterly transformative birth of Europe. Imagine a world power, a titan that stretched across continents, an empire that defined civilization for centuries, suddenly gone. What happens in the vacuum? What rises from the ashes? This isn't just a story of collapse, it's a story of creation, forged from three volatile ingredients: the ashes of the Roman Empire, the unstoppable rise of a new faith called Christianity, and the relentless ambition of the so-called barbarian tribes. This is the story of how our world was born. For the first 2 centuries of the Common Era, the Roman Empire was the world. It was the legendary Pax Romana, a 200-year golden age of stability and peace. Its citizens from Britain to Syria enjoyed a level of culture, security, and prosperity that was unmatched. All of it held together by a centralized government and an incredible network of infrastructure. But in a remote corner of this empire, a new religion was quietly taking root. Christianity, which began as a small Jewish sect, slowly but surely spread through the pagan Roman world. By the 4th century, it had captured the hearts of the emperors themselves, becoming the official state religion. But this triumph happened just as Rome's glory was fading. The giant was sick. Plagues, inflation, famine, and constant invasions were tearing it apart at the seams. It was simply too big to manage from a single city. So, in 395, the empire was split in two: a Western Empire, with its capital in Rome, and a wealthy, prosperous Eastern Empire, ruled from the magnificent city of Constantinople. The West, however, was rural, poor, and weak. Its days were numbered. Beyond the fortified borders, in the deep, dark forests of Europe, entire peoples were on the move. These were mostly Germanic tribes, led by fierce warlords and their intensely loyal warbands, and they were pressing harder and harder on the fragile frontiers of the Rhine and Danube rivers. The Western Empire, with little choice, began to let them in. But soon the floodgates broke. The borders were breached, and a great migration of peoples began, carving up Roman territory as the central imperial authority completely crumbled. In 476, the final moment came. The barbarian leader Odoacer deposed the last emperor of the West, a man ironically named Romulus Augustulus. This wasn't a mighty general, but a powerless boy emperor, and his removal was more of a final whimper than a bang. But it was a milestone, nonetheless. The Western Roman Empire was officially no more. The so-called Dark Ages had begun. By the year 500, Europe was a patchwork of new kingdoms, all ruled by barbarian kings. Their elites, a mix of old Roman families and new barbarian warriors, had slowly converted to Christianity. The most powerful of these new kingdoms belonged to the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Visigoths in Spain, and the Franks in Gaul. But these new kingdoms were a shadow of what came before. The great cities of antiquity were shrinking, many falling into ruin. The great Roman road network crumbled, and therefore, communication and long-distance trade withered away. Coins vanished from circulation, and therefore, there was no economic system to support professional armies or complex administrations. Literacy plummeted. And most importantly, the peace and security of the Pax Romana was a distant memory. The West was becoming a fractured, localized, and impoverished world. For a moment, it seemed like the old glory could be restored. In the 6th century, the powerful Byzantine Emperor Justinian I launched a massive campaign to reconquer the West. He dreamed of reuniting the Roman Empire. But after a brutal war to retake Italy, the peninsula was immediately invaded by a new tribe, the Lombards. The Byzantines had to accept a hard truth. The split between East and West was permanent, and soon another division would shatter the old Roman world. In the 7th century, Arab armies, united by the new faith of Islam, exploded out of Arabia. With incredible speed, they conquered the Middle East and North Africa, creating a vast and powerful Islamic caliphate. Where one civilization had once stood, there were now 3: the Islamic Caliphate, the Byzantine Empire, and the fragile, struggling kingdoms of the West. It seemed as though the West might be swallowed whole. Muslim armies crushed the Visigothic kingdom in Spain and began raiding deep into the kingdom of the Franks. But in the year 732, at the Battle of Tours, they were stopped. A Frankish army, led by a brilliant commander named Charles Martel, defeated the invaders, halting the Islamic advance into Western Europe. This victory was so decisive that Charles, whose name means the hammer, gave his name to a dynasty that would change history, the Carolingians. Charles Martel's son, Pepin the Short, seized the Frankish throne. He then marched into Italy, defeated the Lombards, and granted the Pope his own territory, creating a state that would last for over 1,000 years. But it was Pepin's son who would become a legend, Charlemagne. Ascending to the throne in 768, he spent decades at war, relentlessly expanding his kingdom until he ruled over nearly all of Western Christendom. And so, in the year 800, on Christmas Day, Pope Leo III placed a crown on Charlemagne's head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. For the first time in over 300 years, the West had an emperor once again. It was a stunning revival. The Carolingian Empire was the first great power of the medieval West, and it left a powerful legacy. Charlemagne sparked a cultural and intellectual revival, a renaissance that sought to recover the lost knowledge of antiquity. He established political structures and institutions that would form the very bedrock of medieval civilization. Most importantly, he cemented the ideal of a unified Christian West. But here's the problem with trying to build an empire in a world without highways or the internet. It couldn't last. The economy was too weak, the bureaucracy too limited. After Charlemagne's death, his empire was torn apart by his own grandsons. In 843, the Treaty of Verdun divided the great empire into 3 parts. The Middle Kingdom soon collapsed, leaving only West Francia, which would become France, and East Francia, which would one day become Germany. And these kingdoms continued to fracture. Just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, they did. In the 9th and 10th centuries, Europe was attacked from every direction at once. From the north, the Vikings. Their iconic longships sliced through the rivers of Europe, raiding and terrorizing everything in their path. From the east, the Magyars, nomadic horsemen who would become the Hungarians, plundered defenseless towns. And from the south, Muslim pirates and raiders attacked Europe's shores. Europe was under siege. In this world of constant raids and weak kings, power shifted. Central authority collapsed, and local lords grew stronger. Europe became dotted with wooden castles, the fortified homes of nobles who offered protection to the peasants in their area in exchange for their resources and labor. This was a world ruled by a warrior nobility. New military technology, like the stirrup, made heavy cavalry the dominant force on the battlefield, a force that only wealthy nobles could afford to field. Land and power were exchanged through a system of vassalage. A lord granted land and protection to a lesser noble, who in return swore an oath of fealty and promised military service. This complex web of personal loyalties and obligations is what we call the feudal system. But by the 10th century, the tide began to turn. The climate improved, boosting harvests. The invasions ceased as Vikings and Hungarians settled down and converted to Christianity. In Britain, Alfred the Great and his successors united the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, creating England. In West Francia, Vikings who settled in the north became the French-speaking Christian Normans, creating a buffer against other raiders. And in East Francia, Otto the Great crushed the Magyars at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, ending the eastern invasions for good. A victorious Otto was crowned emperor in 962, creating what would later be known as the Holy Roman Empire. Europe was finally stable. The year 1000 marks a major turning point. For the next 300 years, Europe experienced incredible growth and prosperity. A quiet agricultural revolution, driven by new technologies and a better climate, led to more food, which in turn led to a population boom. Forests were cleared, new towns were founded, and old cities swelled in size, becoming hubs for a new class of merchants who won their independence from feudal lords. Art, architecture, and learning flourished. The first universities were founded. And with this newfound confidence, Europe began to push outwards. In 1066, William the Conqueror, the Duke of Normandy, invaded England and seized the throne at the Battle of Hastings. In Spain, the Christian kingdoms of the north began the Reconquista, a centuries-long war to push the Muslims out of the Iberian Peninsula. In southern Italy, Norman warriors conquered lands from the Byzantines and Muslims, establishing another powerful kingdom. But their gaze was cast even further. In 1095, Pope Urban II delivered a fiery sermon, calling on the Christian knights of Europe to march to the Holy Land and liberate Jerusalem from Muslim rule. This was the beginning of the Crusades. For 200 years, Crusader armies fought in the East, a clear signal that the weak and fractured West was now a major power on the world stage. This power was embodied by the Catholic Church. In the early Middle Ages, the papacy was weak, but a powerful reform movement sought to free the Church from the control of kings and nobles, rebuilding it as a papal monarchy. This led to a massive power struggle, most famously between Pope Gregory VII and the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV. While the conflict had many turns, the long-term result was clear. The Church had become a powerful, centralized, and hierarchical organization, with the Pope at its head, ruling as an absolute monarch. This consolidation of power inspired the kings of Europe. For centuries, their authority had been limited by their powerful aristocratic vassals. But now, in places like England and France, kings began to slowly but surely expand their domains and build functioning states, laying the foundations for the modern nations we know today. The High Middle Ages were a time of revolution, growth, and cultural vibrancy, but around the year 1300 it all came to a halt. The climate worsened, growth stagnated, and famine spread. A great calamity was on the horizon. Then, in 1347, a catastrophe unlike any other arrived. A silent, invisible killer that had swept across Asia reached Europe, the Black Death. The plague spread with terrifying speed, and within just a few years, it killed roughly one-third of Europe's entire population. It was a demographic disaster of unimaginable scale. But for those who survived, the world had fundamentally changed. With the population so drastically reduced, land was plentiful and labor was in high demand. Peasants and workers suddenly had bargaining power. They demanded better conditions. And when the elites refused, massive revolts erupted across Europe. And though most of these revolts were brutally suppressed, in the long run, change was unstoppable. A new world was emerging from the darkness of the plague. Technological innovation exploded. Windmills, eyeglasses, and, crucially, the printing press changed society forever. In the recovering cities of Italy, a new cultural movement flourished, the Renaissance, a rebirth of the art and learning of ancient Greece and Rome. And in the 15th century, another invention transformed the world: gunpowder. The age of the knight in shining armor was over, not ended by a dragon, but by a simple peasant with a firearm. Fortified castles could now be breached with cannons. This new kind of warfare was expensive, something only kings could afford, which allowed them to consolidate power, monopolize the use of force, and create the first sovereign states. These new states were immediately put to the test. The 100 Years' War raged between England and France. In Iberia, the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile united Spain, which then conquered Granada, the last Muslim stronghold on the peninsula. The modern nations of England, France, and Spain were taking shape. As the Middle Ages drew to a close, Europe was not just recovering, it was being rebuilt on stronger foundations. By 1500, its focus was turning decisively outward. Portuguese ships had rounded Africa, opening trade routes to the Far East, and Spain had turned west, crossing the Atlantic. Columbus's voyage in 1492 marked the end of one era and the dawn of another. The foundations of the modern world had been laid, forged in the fires of chaos, faith, and ambition. The Middle Ages were over. The story of our world was just beginning.